Mike Sanders' eyes opened a few minutes before he got up. Today was the day that he and his fellow campmates would become what the instructors called second class, which meant that the first grueling month was finally over. He remembered his first day at Camp Rawlins like it was yesterday. The small bus pulled into the parking lot of a camp located somewhere in the mountains of northern Idaho. When the bus stopped, a large man in khaki and a cap came on board and quickly ordered everyone to get off, ordering them to stand on the prints painted on the ground. Mike grabbed his gear and followed the others outside. A few minutes later, he heard a loud voice coming from above the platform. "Oh my God," the man yelled, looking around at the small group of men standing in the parking lot. "How the hell do they expect me to make men out of you when they haven't even sent me human beings to start with? This is the most pathetic collection of uneducated nobodies I've ever seen in my fucking life. Christ on a bicycle." He turned to another man in uniform. "Get this pathetic crowd out of my sight and get them through the reception before I start swearing." "Yes, Sergeant," the other man answered. He turned to the group of 15 people and told them to turn to the right and go forward. When they approached a small building, he told them to stop. One by one, the men entered the building, where they had their hair cut short and given 2 sets of olive overalls, several white t-shirts and boxer shorts, socks, sneakers, boots, caps, and a bag of toiletries. They were told to undress and given a few seconds to shower, shave, and put on their uniform. When they finished, a man in uniform ordered them to line up outside. He explained the rules, which were simple. They were not to speak unless spoken to, were to run wherever they were sent, and follow all instructions without question. After that, he turned them to the right and ran towards another small building, which turned out to be their barracks. They were informed that this would be their home for the next 3 months. The first month was grueling. They ran, they trained, and every day they were repeatedly yelled at by instructors who would not accept refusal or failure for any reason. Their day began at 5 o'clock in the morning, when the wake-up call sounded from the loudspeakers. They ran to breakfast, to physical training, up and down steep hills, through obstacle courses, to the gym, where they lifted weights until their arms almost fell off. Then they ran again, had lunch, and continued running. The instructors managed to be as cruel as they were inventive. They were given exercises that Mike thought were completely pointless. This continued every day from 5 o'clock to 18:30 until returning from dinner, when they were allowed 1 cigarette in the ranks in front of the barracks. When Mike arrived, he didn't smoke. Now he was smoking. The only other break was on Sundays. Those who wanted to go to church. The rest were given tasks around the camp, cutting the grass, washing clothes. On this day, they were allowed to write letters. Some wrote to their wives, others to their children. Mike wrote only 1 letter to his wife on the first Sunday after his arrival, telling him he was safe. She didn't answer. Mike hadn't expected to hear from her. She was, after all, the main reason he was here. But he received letters from others and answered them. Mike was told that this was part of the process, and he tried to hold on as best he could and move on. It was explained to him that the goal was to make him stronger, both physically and mentally. He was told that this was necessary so that he could deal with the storm of life he was having in his marriage. But Mike had no more time to think about it, as the morning wake-up call sounded over the loudspeakers. At that same second, the lights in the barracks came on, and before the sergeant could say anything, all 15 people stood at attention in front of their bunks. "You have 30 seconds to relieve yourself, shower, shave, and get ready to eat," he said, entering his office. All 15 people grabbed their gear and ran into the large bathroom, where they quickly showered and shaved. As soon as they got dressed, they ran outside and lined up. They ran to breakfast, and then, after eating quickly, they were lined up again and taken to another building where they were told to sit on chairs arranged in a semicircle facing 1 chair in front. The sergeant sat down at the very end of the room. A few minutes later, an attractive woman in a white robe entered the room and placed her suitcase on the table. A man in a light jacket with some strange emblem came in with her. She opened her suitcase and took out a stack of folders before sitting down on a chair. She flipped through the folders and called the 2 by name. "Please follow this officer," she said. The two men looked at each other and followed the man into the next room. The others tried to understand what was happening, but there was no time left to think. My name is Dr. Deborah White. Today, your emotional healing process begins, the woman said. Over the past month, you have been broken and rebuilt physically. Now the work will begin on your psychological and emotional side, part of your return to masculinity. We'll start by giving each of you the opportunity to tell your story. Don't be embarrassed or shy. Each of you is here for the same reason. And believe me, you won't be able to shock or confuse me. I've already heard everything possible. She opened the first folder and looked at Mike. Let's start with you, she said. Tell me briefly, in 5 to 10 minutes. Do I need to stand up or introduce myself somehow? Mike asked. She shook her head. No, she answered. You can remain seated, but I want you to introduce yourself to the group as if you've never met them, and start by admitting who you are. Sorry, doctor, Mike hesitated. I don't quite understand what you mean. You're here because you admitted that you're a weakling and a cuckold, aren't you? She asked. Mike nodded, embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed, Mike, she said. Everyone here is the same as you. The first step to solving your problem is admitting it. He looked at her before speaking. My name is Mike Sanders, and I'm a weakling and a cuckold, he said quietly. Everyone in the room, including the doctor and the sergeant, responded. Good morning, Mike. Tell us your story, Dr. White said. Mike began his story. I've been married to Sandy for 4 years. We met in college, dated, fell in love, and got married. I work as a sales manager in a financial company. My wife is licensed as a realtor and works as a real estate agent. I thought we had a good marriage. We even planned to have a child. My wife started visiting me at work, spending time with my boss. Colleagues who saw them together told me that they were often together. It seemed strange to me that she almost never came to see me. Then my boss started assigning me to do small tasks, the kind that janitors usually did. I am not one who likes conflicts, so I silently followed his orders. He then demanded that I call him sir in front of all the other employees. I noticed that he did not make similar demands on others, but I again obeyed. He often called me into his office to simply order him to make coffee. And again I submitted. Problems started at home. Sandy began to insult and humiliate me at every opportunity. But the money I brought home suited her quite well. Then she began staying late at work, dressing provocatively and going out with her girlfriends, returning home only in the morning. Up to this point, we had a good intimate life, but suddenly it stopped. Sandy no longer took the initiative, and every time I tried to get closer, she made up excuses that she was tired or not in the mood. One day, my boss came to my office and announced that he would come to us for dinner that evening. I was shocked. He didn't even ask if I had any plans. He just said that he would come and that I should cook him dinner the way he wanted it. Okay, I thought, and called my wife. Then she said that she had invited him herself and that I would have to cook the steak. And she also said that he likes it rare. I asked why she didn't tell me anything, and in response I heard some kind of excuse. I knew that something was wrong here, but I could not imagine what awaited me that evening. I cooked the steaks as she ordered and did everything else because she was too busy getting ready. When she came downstairs, she looked absolutely stunning in a short skirt that I had never seen her wear before. She opened the door when my boss arrived and greeted him with a passionate kiss right on the lips. What the hell is this? I thought. But this turned out to be just the beginning. Things got even worse. She expected me to set the table and serve them while they ate dinner. At the table, they hardly spoke to me. They didn't even thank me for the food I bought and prepared. After dinner, my boss sat back and said, "Time for dessert." I didn't understand what he meant until I saw him pull my wife towards him, kiss her, and start groping her thighs. I was ready to lose my temper, but Sandy put her finger on my lips and whispered to me to behave, otherwise I would feel bad. The boss then grabbed me by the shirt and told me to follow them. I obeyed, and they led me to the bedroom. My wife told me to sit on a chair that she had previously placed in the corner. She then handed the boss a roll of tape, and they began tying me to the chair. I tried to resist, but they beat me and insulted me. When they finally secured me, Sandy began to undress. I couldn't believe my eyes. I begged her to stop, but she just laughed in my face. Then the boss undressed and Sandy knelt in front of him to please him, all the while looking at me. I cried and screamed, trying to get out of the chair, but they just laughed at me. Then she lay down on the bed with her legs spread wide open, and my boss started making love to her. All this time they humiliated and insulted me. I wanted to kill them both, but I knew that I could not physically cope with the boss, who was much larger than me. When he finished, he came over to me, grabbed my shirt, and forced me to press my face against it, ordering me to clean it. I couldn't believe that my wife actually wanted me to go through this. Finally, he pushed me away and got dressed. "Get used to it, little cuckold," he said. "I will do this regularly, and don't even think about telling anyone about this, or I'll kill you." "Got it, weakling." I didn't say anything. He hit me in the face. I asked, "Did you understand, Weakman?" I just nodded. "And don't even think about divorce. And don't you dare approach my wife, otherwise you'll blame yourself." After he left, my wife freed me from the tape. I looked at her in shock. "Why?" I asked her. "Because it's fun, and he has a lot more than you," she replied. "And remember, you will never touch this body again." I felt hatred for her at that moment. "What if he gets you pregnant?" I asked. "Then you will raise his child," she answered, "and you will accept it as your own." I shook my head. "I will never agree to this," I said. "Shut up," she replied. "You don't have to agree. You belong to me. Now be a good boy and go to your room. You will never sleep in this bed again, and from now on you will do everything I say." I went to the guest bedroom. She has already moved all my things there. Then I decided that I never wanted to share the same bed with this woman again, and he swore that, no matter what, I would take revenge on both of them. "But it didn't end there, did it, Mike?" Dr. White asked when he had finished. Mike shook his head. "No, it's not over," he said. "My boss started coming 2 or 3 times a week, and they repeated it over and over again. Each time they tied me up and forced me to watch. My boss even went so far as to urinate on me a couple of times while my wife watched and laughed." "And what did your wife do?" asked Dr. White. "She put one of those chastity belts on me," he said. "She said that I need to be controlled so that I don't try to find someone on the side." "How long did this last?" she asked. "About 5 months," Mike answered. "That's when I came across your program." "We'll talk later, Mike," she said. "Thank you for sharing your story. I know how difficult it was for you. But remember, you are no longer alone. And the fact that you're here and taking action means you're no longer a weakling." Dr. White walked around all the other participants and allowed them to tell their stories. Mike listened as they described what had brought them to Camp Rawlins, and he realized for the first time that he was truly not alone. Moreover, he noticed that some of them found themselves in much worse situations. An hour later, 2 more men joined them again and told their stories, which sent chills through Mike and the others. After 3 hours, everyone told their story, and Dr. White concluded the group session by saying that sessions would continue, both group and individual. The sergeant lined them up outside, and the group went to lunch, after which the day's training was planned. As Mike lay in bed that evening, he recalled the events that led him to Camp Rawlins. He was looking for information that could help him understand his rights and options from a legal perspective. He had already consulted with several lawyers and realized that in the event of a divorce, he could suffer greatly financially. It was during this search that he first learned of Camp Rawlins. While he was searching for information, an ad popped up on the screen that immediately caught his attention. He clicked on it, and a new browser window opened, in which the video immediately began to play. In it, a man in a khaki uniform rose from his desk and walked toward the camera. "Do you feel less than a man? Does your spouse or partner treat you like trash, neglecting you at every turn and making you a laughing stock? Are you tired of contemptuous grins, ridicule, and outright betrayal? Do you want to regain your dignity and respect? If so, we can help make it happen," he said. "It won't be easy. This may be the most difficult test of your life, but believe me, in the end, you will become better at everything. When you complete our 3-month program, you will be a better person in every way physically and emotionally. You will learn to control your life and deal with those who made your life hell, he added. Another man appeared in the frame wearing a denim shirt and jeans. He turned and looked into the camera. "My name is Jacob Winters," he said. "Before I came to Camp Rawlins, I was a weak and pathetic husband. My wife treated me like I was worthless every day, forcing me to watch her spend time with other men. I was tired of her neglect and ridicule and came here. I am now in control of my life, and my wife is back to being the loving woman I once knew." The man in uniform put his hand on Jacob's shoulder and turned back to the camera. "Jacob's story could be yours," he said. "Are you ready to take your life into your own hands? Are you ready to return what rightfully belongs to you? If so, call the number on the screen and speak to one of our consultants. We will organize everything for you, and soon you will be on your way to a new life. Take the first step now. Pick up the phone and call." The screen went dark, leaving the phone number on it in large white numbers. Mike wrote down the number and called. "Thank you for calling Camp Rawlins. Elaine here. How can I help?" A friendly female voice rang out. Yeah, I just saw your ad on the internet and would like to know more about your program," Mike said, a little embarrassed. "Of course, sir," Elaine replied. "Judging by your number, we have an office very close by, and they can carry out all the necessary assessments and organize a program for you. FYI, our program includes a 3-month training course in scenic Idaho that will include physical training, counseling, and life skills classes. Most insurance plans cover the program as part of their medical benefits. Once you complete the course, you will have access to our 24/7 support line in case of need. May I make an appointment for you, sir?" "Damn it, this has to end," Mike thought. "Yes, appoint it," he said. "Excellent, sir," Elaine said. "Can I make an appointment for you today, if that suits you?" "Yes," Mike replied. "Great," she confirmed. "Is 10:30 am right for you?" "Fits," Mike said. She confirmed the meeting and gave him the address, which turned out to be just a few blocks from his office. After closing the system, he left the office and told the secretary that he was not feeling well and was going to see a doctor. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. Mike nodded. "Yes. Just don't tell my wife if she calls. Tell Greg I won't be there if he asks, that I left because I wasn't feeling well." "Okay," she said. Mike went to the address Elaine gave him. He spent some time with the consultant, going into detail about everything that had happened. The consultant listened and took notes while Mike spoke. When Mike finished, he watched as the consultant reviewed his notes before speaking. "I think we can help you," the consultant said. "It won't be easy. Moreover, it will probably be the most difficult test of your life. But you will come out of it a different person. How much time can you take for this?" "I have accumulated over 500 hours of sick time, 4 weeks of unused vacation time, and a lot of comp time," Mike responded. "I think this is quite enough," the consultant said. "Our program lasts 3 months, and I am confident that your insurance will cover most, if not all, of the costs. I recommend applying for temporary separation from your wife during your absence. We can start this process right now. While you are away, our specialists will monitor the situation and send you weekly reports. We can install electronic surveillance today if you wish. Then, if you decide to get a divorce, you will have all the necessary evidence. We can organize this and have the paperwork ready in a few days." "Do it," Mike said. "When can I start classes?" "We have a place in the group that starts on the 1st, that is, in 10 days. Are you interested?" "Sign me up," Mike said. "What if my boss tries to sabotage this?" he asked. "State laws prohibit this," the consultant said. "We will provide all documents for your HR department. If they try to pressure you, you will have grounds to sue." Mike signed all the papers and gave the consultant a key to the house so they could install the equipment. It took some more time to complete all the formalities, and when Mike left the office, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He headed to the personnel department. The head of human resources, Melissa Jenkins, was not thrilled with his application, but she still completed the paperwork for paid leave. "You know Greg won't like this," she said. "I don't care what Greg likes or doesn't like," Mike said. "It was he who brought me to this state." Melissa looked at him with regret. She understood a lot more than Mike thought. She had seen his wife and Greg together more than once. "Listen, Mike," she said. "You have a lot of time saved up. Maybe you can take 10 more days while you prepare to leave." "I will need to find someone to take care of my affairs first," he replied. "Okay," she said. "Don't worry about Greg. The law is on your side, and there is nothing they can do to stop you from going on vacation." This, however, did not stop Greg from causing a huge scandal. "What do you mean, you're going on paid leave?" he barked. "Who will take care of your clients?" "I've already talked to Steve. He'll handle all my business," Mike replied. "What about your wife?" asked Greg. "Who will cook and clean?" "Looks like she'll have to handle it on her own," Mike replied calmly. "Oh, and one more thing." Mike took another piece of paper out of the folder and placed it on the table in front of Greg. Greg's face turned red as he read the document. "What the hell is this?" he asked. "It's a restrictive order," Mike said. "It says you need to stay 500 feet away from me and my house outside of work." "Sanders, I'm warning you, this won't end well for you," Greg muttered. "What are you going to do?" Mike asked coldly. "Hide in the bushes and beat me up at the first opportunity? Maybe tie me up again and sleep with my wife? Or kill me, as you have threatened more than once?" "I might do that," Greg said through gritted teeth. Mike pulled out a digital voice recorder from his pocket and played a recording of Greg's last words. Greg's face turned pale. "Please give me a reason to put you behind bars," Mike said calmly. He then threw the papers on Greg's desk and walked out. He returned home and packed enough clothes to last him until he left for camp. If the consultant was right, the house should already be equipped with audio and video surveillance. He looked around the house one last time and closed the door. The next days at camp passed quickly for Mike. Now his schedule included not only physical training, but also psychological consultations. He felt physically better than he had in years and looked forward to every workout. He noticed a dramatic change when looking in the mirror. Improved physical condition helped him cope with the emotional pain caused by his wife's betrayal. Roland's busy camp schedule didn't leave him much time to think about Sandy, which proved helpful. But sometimes he wondered how she was coping with their separation. Meanwhile, Sandy sat in the living room, wondering if she should write to her husband. His departure came as a shock to her. She did not expect that he would decide to take such decisive and uncompromising actions. She remembered the day when she came home and didn't find him. There was no note, no warning, nothing. The only evidence was the things that had disappeared from his room. She waited for him to return, but this did not happen. She tried to call him on his cell phone, but his calls went straight to voicemail. She called Greg, but he only mentioned something about a time limit and a vacation Mike was taking. Sandy wondered what that could mean. She tried to invite Greg to her home to talk, but he refused, saying that no woman is worth jail time. She called his secretary, but she answered that Mike was away for a long time. Nobody wanted to explain to her what was happening. Over the next 2 days, she went to Mike's office, hoping to catch him, but he wasn't there. She went to Greg's office, hoping to find out at least something. "You mean he's not at home?" asked Greg. "No," she replied. "He hasn't been home for a couple of days. He didn't even call. I'm worried." "You don't have to worry," Greg said. "He's probably just licking his wounds somewhere." "Maybe we went too far?" she asked. "Maybe he's gone forever." "So, is this bad?" Greg grinned. "Yes," she said. "I need him. I won't be able to manage the household without him." "Interesting," Greg said. "You never said you loved him." "Well, I love him," she said. "It's just not the same as before." "If your husband were a man, he would have kicked you out a long time ago," Greg said. "I would kick you out if you were my wife." "Is it true?" Sandy was dumbfounded. Would you kick me out? Hell yes, Greg replied, without hesitation. But you married a weakling. I bet he will come crawling in a few days, begging for mercy. Sandy shook her head. I hope you're right, she replied. Meanwhile, Mike was preparing for a 3-month absence. He didn't call Sandy or take her calls. However, on the eve of departure, he still went home. Sandy answered the door for him shortly after he called. You don't have to ring the doorbell, she said. This is your home too. Mike looked around as if he expected to see someone. Are you alone? He asked. Yes, she replied. Come in. Mike stepped inside, but continued to look around warily. It's okay, Mike. There's no one here. Would you like some coffee? No, he said. I came for a short time. I need to tell you something and explain what will happen next. What do you mean? She became wary. He took out a piece of paper from the folder and handed it to her. Sandy's eyes widened when she read it. What the hell is this? She asked. Temporary separation, Mike replied. I'll be gone for 3 months. After that, we will discuss divorce. Divorce? She asked in shock. I don't want a divorce. You must stay here and take care of me. You want me to stay so you and Greg can humiliate me further, he said coldly. I can't do this anymore. You two are just killing me. I need to leave to recover. Don't worry, I left all bills set to be paid automatically from my account. I also arranged a small weekly transfer for groceries and gas. You will have to cover the remaining expenses from your salary. I have removed your name from our joint account. Your bank card has been deactivated, and your joint credit card has been canceled. But who will cook, clean, and do all the things you usually do around the house? She asked. You'll have to handle it yourself, he replied. I'll send you a postcard when I get there, and you can write to me if you want. I won't have access to my phone or email, but I will leave you an emergency number in case of a real emergency. He took off his wedding ring and placed it on the table. What are you doing? She asked in surprise. I'll give you something to think about while I'm gone, he replied. If in these 3 months you can show me love and respect, perhaps we can try to save our marriage. If not, the separation will become a divorce. This means no Greg and no one else. And yes, I will know if you cheat. Mike, this is stupid, she said. I love you. You don't have to leave. I need you here, next to me. He shook his head. I don't believe you, he said. No one who loves another person can do what you and Greg did to me. I know you both think I'm a wimp, and maybe I am, but I have feelings too. I've never been rude or pressured by you, and apparently that's why you decided it was okay to treat me like that. But I intend to change that. And now everything depends on you. It's time for me to go. Goodbye, Sandy. He turned and left before she could say anything. She looked after him, with tears in her eyes, realizing that he was right. No one who truly loves another would do such a thing. Another thing she realized was that she had truly lost all respect for him as a man. A few days later, Sandy received a postcard from him notifying him that he had arrived. He didn't write anything else. There were no words of love, no phrases like, I miss you. The card contained only an emergency number, which he asked to use only in case of emergency. He also left a mailbox address in Idaho where she could write if she wanted. But Sandy never wrote to him, and Mike never answered her. She assumed that he was waiting for her letter before replying. She was so used to email and messages that the thought of writing a real letter seemed strange to her. She began to write several times, but each time she threw away what she had written. It did not occur to her what to say. Greg stayed away from home for a while, but they continued to keep in touch, meeting at a small motel on the outskirts of town. Neither he nor Sandy noticed the man who was videotaping their encounters. Greg soon began visiting her at home. These meetings were also recorded. Reports of this material, including photographs and videos, were sent to Mike weekly. A few weeks later, Greg asked her to go to Las Vegas for the weekend to have fun, which of course meant sex. Sandy didn't agree at first, but Greg assured her that Mike would never find out. In the end, he persuaded her and she agreed. Meanwhile, Mike's class continued physical training and psychological counseling. The instructors began teaching them hand-to-hand combat. Mike discovered that he enjoyed training and gave it his all. Consultations also went well. The psychologist told Mike that his reluctance to engage in physical conflicts was due, in part, to the absence of a real father in his life. His father died when Mike was young, and he was raised by his mother and grandmother. Although the mother had several boyfriends over the years, she never remarried. They were both kind to him, but he had no male example before his eyes. While other boys hunted, fished, or played with their fathers, he sat at home, studying or helping with housework. As a result, the psychologist said, Mike never learned to stand up for himself, having become accustomed to mindlessly obeying the orders of the women in his life. This, according to the psychologist, was reflected in his marriage. That's why, in his opinion, Mike always agreed to everything Sandy wanted. How much of this was true or psychological nonsense, Mike didn't know, but reflecting on his childhood, he admitted that it sounded logical. As a child, his mother and grandmother protected him and did not allow him to engage in sports or other activities, believing that he might get hurt. Friends invited him to go hunting or fishing, but his mother refused them, fearing for his safety. He remembered being teased and called "Mama's boy" by his classmates. The situation only worsened when his mother began taking him to school and walking him all the way to the entrance. He kept to himself, but the ridicule and bullying continued until he graduated from school. As he got older, he wanted to buy a motorcycle, but he was forbidden to do so. Instead, his mother persuaded him to buy a safe, compact, and economical car. This continued in college when he was persuaded to enroll in a local institute so that his mother and grandmother could keep an eye on him and keep him out of trouble. Of course, they fell in love with Sandy and spent a lot of time with her, giving her advice on how best to keep Mike in line. All this, he now believed, led to where he found himself now. Every week he waited impatiently for the mail, hoping for a letter from Sandy, but she never wrote. Instead, he received packages from detectives telling him about her activities. The packages contained photographs that filled him with rage. The issue of divorce was resolved, and the traders will pay in full. Mike redoubled his physical training, imagining Greg's face on a heavy 100-pound punching bag at the gym. The following week, he received a report from a detective that angered him so much that he had to spend extra time with a psychologist. The report stated that Sandy and Greg spent the weekend in Las Vegas. But that was not all. According to the detective, she had sex with Greg and a number of other men. The photographs nearly drove him crazy. For starters, neither man used protection. Several photos showed Sandy servicing 3 men, including Greg. Another photo showed 2 men having sex with her at the same time. The next 2 weeks flew by for Mike as one day as he trained with unprecedented passion. Meanwhile, Sandy was enjoying the attention of 3 men in her bed. Greg, in her opinion, was good, but no one, not even him, could satisfy her the way several men did at once. After a trip to Las Vegas, Sandy became addicted to multiple partners and other types of sex, which Mike never wanted. Her only regret was that her husband was not there to clean up after her. Yes, of course, Greg was good when she wanted someone alone, but nothing could compare to 3 at once. She loved the feeling of 2 large men inside her at the same time. It seemed to her that after this Mike, with his small size, would never satisfy her again. Well, okay, she thought, this is his problem. Of course, she had no idea that all her nightly adventures were recorded and would ultimately become her death sentence. Mike's training entered its final phase, which included advanced hand-to-hand combat, advanced mental and physical training, and legal advice. Camp lawyers studied all the materials provided by Mike and developed an action plan. One of the lawyers sitting at the table motioned for Mike to sit down. "We have reviewed all the evidence you provided, Mr. Sanders," the lawyer said, "and they came to the conclusion that you have enough material to prosecute your wife for adultery and abuse. Typically, divorces in your state are considered no fault, but the law allows for exceptional circumstances, especially when it comes to the division of marital property. I would like to know what you want to achieve in the end. Total. I want to push this bitch to the wall, Mike replied, and that bastard Greg Morton too. You mean your boss, right? The lawyer clarified. Yes, sir, Mike nodded. Well, forget about the claim for alienation of affection, the lawyer said. However, we can file a claim for intentional infliction of emotional harm. And in addition, we can take action against the company, especially since they have a moral clause in the contract. The company will probably just fire him, but I'm sure we can get you a good settlement. Go ahead, Mike agreed. What about the house? Asked the lawyer. Do you want to sell it and divide the proceeds? That'll do, Mike nodded. Apart from my personal belongings, I don't need anything there. What about reconciliation? The lawyer continued. Not even discussed, Mike replied. You yourself saw the photographs and videos. I saw it, confirmed the lawyer, and I think that, given your equal income, alimony will not be assigned. We will prepare documents for your approval and begin the case against your boss. When can we give the documents to my wife? Mike asked. I would like to be there. We can do this on the day you return home if you want, the lawyer replied. Great, Mike said. Thank you. 2 weeks later, Mike was called into the lawyer's office. When he entered, a man in an expensive suit stood up to meet him and extended his hand. Mr. Sanders, he introduced himself. My name is Lincoln Steele from Corporate Legal Services. Nice to meet you. Me too, Mike answered. You look completely different from your corporate photo, Lincoln noted. Mike smiled. They helped me, and I feel better than I ever have in my life, Mike replied. We have received your case and would like to offer you a settlement if you are willing to consider it, Lincoln said. Mike looked at his lawyer. Listen to what he says, Mike, the lawyer nodded. Mike turned to Lincoln. Okay, he said. What do you propose? The company has authorized me to issue you a check for $1.5 million after taxes, Lincoln said. In addition, we agree that Mr. Morton should be fired with a written notice. What in return? Mike clarified. We have several conditions that we hope will be acceptable to you, Lincoln said. First, you agree to drop the lawsuit and not disclose the settlement amount. Secondly, the company believes that you will be an excellent replacement for Mr. Morton in his position. If you accept this position, of course. Mike looked at his lawyer, who nodded approvingly. I would agree if I were you, Mike, said the lawyer. Mike nodded and turned to Lincoln. I wonder, Mr. Steele, he asked, why are you offering me this settlement? Fair question, Mike, Lincoln replied. We have received many complaints about Mr. Morton, and frankly, he would be the subject of a sexual harassment lawsuit. What he did to you not only violated our moral code, but it was also illegal and could have brought the company a lot of negative publicity. I understand, Mike replied. I accept your offer. I still have a couple of days here, but I'll be glad to get started. Lincoln smiled. Excellent choice, he said. By the way, we have heard a lot of good things about you and believe that your promotion was long overdue. Please accept our apologies for what happened to your marriage. Mike nodded and shook Lincoln's hand firmly. Thank you, he said as Lincoln handed him a check and a receipt for the full amount after taxes. We'll be glad to see you at work, Lincoln said as he left the office. Mike roared with delight and exchanged high fives with the lawyer. Thank you for everything, he said, shaking the lawyer's hand. I would wait to cash the check, the lawyer advised, until the divorce is completed. Okay, I'll wait, Mike agreed. A few days later, the sergeant formed a classroom on the parade ground after dinner. On the ground in front of the pillar lay a straw effigy, around which a pile of firewood was stacked. Okay, guys, he addressed them. Today we will burn the witch. When I give the command, take a photo of your spouse and pin him to the stuffed animal. Are you ready? Forward. All 15 men pulled out photographs and pinned them to the straw man. Mike, growling, drove the pin into Sandy's face in the photo, attaching it to the figure. Raise the scarecrow, the sergeant commanded. The men picked up the straw effigy and tied it tightly to the post. "Sanders, come forward," ordered the sergeant. Mike walked out and stood in front of the sergeant, who handed him a burning torch. Mike grabbed the torch. "Burn the witch," ordered the sergeant. "Sir, I'll burn the witch." "That's right, sir," Mike shouted back. He walked over to the wood under the straw man and set it on fire. The flames shot up, engulfing the straw. "It's burning, it's burning, it's burning." The men began chanting as the scarecrow began to burn. The photographs swirled in the fire and burned to ashes. "Burn, burn, burn," the men shouted, clenching their fists in the air. Soon their screams turned into roars and furious cries as the effigy burned. Soon the figure fell from the pillar and burned, lying on the ground. Several people unzipped their pants and urinated on the burnt effigy. When the fire went out, the figure turned to ashes. Oddly enough, Mike and the others felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off their shoulders. The sergeant gave each of them a bottle of beer, and the men began to celebrate. That night, they all slept soundly. Meanwhile, Greg was seething with rage as he headed towards Sandy. When he burst into the house, she looked at him with concern. "Greg, what happened?" she asked. "That damn bastard of yours got me fired," he replied. "I'll kill this goat when he returns." "What?" she asked incredulously. She couldn't even believe that her husband was capable of such a thing. "Yes, he filed a complaint with the company and threatened to sue," Greg explained. "Mike wouldn't do that," Sandy said. "He wouldn't even have the guts." "All I know is that when he comes back, I'll break his neck," Greg barked. 2 days later, Mike and his classmates stood at attention, dressed in clean, washed jeans and denim shirts, listening to the camp commander. "You guys have come a long way since you came here," he said. "You arrived here scared, unsure of your future, depressed and humiliated by those you loved most. Now you have your masculinity back. You look like people who are full of confidence and ready to take charge of their lives. You have the skills and will to achieve any goal you set. I wish you all good luck. Remember, we are always here for you, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you need anything, even just to talk, contact us. Now go ahead and take the world by storm." The sergeant stood in front of the line. "Attention, class, disperse." The men happily picked up their bags and headed towards the bus, shaking hands with the sergeant. They gathered near the bus to exchange contacts and promised to stay in touch. During the flight home, Mike wondered what awaited him. He knew for sure that he would not stay with Sandy. No, this stage is long over. But he wondered what she was doing, or more precisely, with whom. He didn't have to think for long. He fell asleep almost until the very end of the flight. When the plane landed, he took his things and headed to the parking lot where he left the car. He drove to the area where Greg lived with his wife, Julia. As he pulled up to Greg's house, he noticed that there was only one car in the driveway and realized that Greg was either not home or had taken his wife's car. When he arrived at the house, Julia was just getting out and heading to the car. He stopped at the side of the road and got out of the car. Julia looked at him. "Mrs. Morton," he said. She approached him. "How can I help?" she asked. "Ma'am, my name is Mike Sanders," he said. "I work with your husband." "Yes, I heard about you," she replied. "Aren't you the one who was recently sent to a mental hospital?" "No," Mike answered. "I was really absent for 3 months, but it was not related to psychiatry. In fact, your husband and my wife drove me to the point where I left." "What do you mean?" she asked. He took a folder out of his briefcase and handed it to Julia. "Your husband and my wife are cheating on us," he said. Her eyes widened as she looked at the photos in the folder. "Moreover, they spent the weekend in Las Vegas." "That damn bastard," she hissed. "He said he went to a conference in Boston." "Mrs. Morton," Mike began, but she interrupted him. "Please call me Julia," she said. "Julia," Mike nodded. "If he hasn't been fired yet, it will happen soon. At the moment, he is probably with my wife. I'm heading home. If you want, come with me." Her eyes sparkled, and she agreed after thinking a little. "Okay," she said. She got into the passenger seat and Mike drove towards his house. On the way, he told her a little about what was happening and the real reason for his absence. "You poor man," she said when he had finished. Mike shrugged. "I'm much better now," he replied. "I feel like a new person." By that time, they had already arrived at his house. Greg's car was parked in the driveway. They got out of the car and saw a man in a suit holding an envelope. "Are you here to deliver papers to Sandy Sanders?" Mike asked. The man nodded. "Great, let's do it," Mike said. They approached the house and rang the doorbell. Sandy opened the door, and a look of shock crossed her face when she saw her husband. He looked like her husband, but now standing in front of her was a strong, muscular man who walked confidently into the house. "Mike," she said, amazed. At that moment, Greg ran into the room, wearing only boxers and boots. His shirt and trousers were lying on the sofa. Everything was obvious. When he saw Mike, his face turned red. He had not yet noticed Julia, but she had already seen him. "Damn bastard," Greg growled and lunged at Mike. Greg swung his massive fist, but Mike easily took him to the floor and broke his arm. Greg screamed in pain, clutching his arm. Mike walked into the kitchen and grabbed a mop and a roll of duct tape from the toolbox. He noticed one of the decorative towels on the kitchen counter and ripped it off. "Mike, please, this towel was a wedding gift," Sandy said pleadingly. "Get out of the way, trash," he barked, pushing her away. Sandy was shocked. Mike had never spoken to her in that tone before. He unscrewed the mop head and broke the wooden handle on his knee, creating 2 splints for Greg's arm. Greg groaned in pain as Mike stood over him. "What are you, a wimp?" Mike asked. "Shut up already, it's just a broken arm." He turned to Julia. "You'd better take this prick to the hospital so they can put him in a proper cast. And while you're there, check it for infections." "Thanks, Mike, sure," Julia replied. "But first, one thing." She walked up to Sandy and hit her hard in the face, leaving a red mark. "This is for ruining my marriage," Julia said, returning to Greg. She helped him get dressed. Greg looked at Mike, his eyes burning with hatred. "I'm not done with you yet, bastard," he croaked through the pain. Mike grabbed him by the collar and stood close to him. "Any time, you pathetic bastard," Mike said. "Next time, I'll break your neck." Greg's eyes widened and Julia supported him and pushed him out the door. A bailiff approached them with an envelope. "Sandra Sanders?" he asked. Sandy nodded. He handed her the envelope. "You have been notified," he said and left. Sandy opened the envelope and nearly fell while reading the documents. "Cruelty and treason. Are you serious?" she whispered. "I will fight you for this." Mike opened his briefcase and pulled out an impressive folder and envelope. "Just sign," he said coldly. "Otherwise, this will all be sent to everyone you know. Family, friends, colleagues. I have photos, videos, everything I need." "You wouldn't dare," she said quietly. "Look at me, you trash," he replied. "Please stop calling me that, Mike," she said, depressed. "Why? Isn't that right?" Mike asked. "Lying, cheating trash, ready to sleep with anyone. How many men have you had in the last 3 months?" "Only 1 or 2, she tried to justify herself. Mike chuckled. "That's what I'm talking about," he said. "I count at least 50, and I'm sure that's not all." "Oh my God, Mike," she said. "What happened to you?" "You happened," he answered sharply. "Sign the papers. Now." He threw his pen on the table. "Sign, you rubbish." With a trembling hand, she took the pen and signed the documents. He checked them before putting them away in his briefcase. "Now pack your things and get out of my house," he said coldly. "You have 10 minutes. Whatever you leave behind, I'll burn or throw away." She stood there, silently crying, but Mike showed no mercy. "Move!" he shouted. Sandy realized that he was serious and began frantically running around the house, collecting things. Mike was keeping an eye on the time, but feeling generous, he gave her 2 more minutes, chuckling to himself as she fussed over trying to load everything into the car. Finally, she finished and stood in front of him. "Have you collected everything, trash?" he asked. She nodded without looking up. Mike took her purse, took out the house key, and tossed it back to her. He then grabbed her left hand and removed the wedding and engagement rings from her finger. "Please, Mike, I have nowhere to go," she whispered through her tears. "It's your problem, trash," he answered coldly. "You should have thought about this earlier before starting all this abomination. Just send me the address so I can send you half the money from the sale of the house and the final paperwork. So we have no chance of getting everything back," she asked with a tremble in her voice. "You must be kidding me, right?" Mike replied with contempt. "You humiliated me, cheated on me with just anyone in our bed, and now you want me to forget everything? You've definitely lost your mind, you bastard." "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking at the floor. "Yeah, it's a pity," he chuckled sarcastically. "Do you really hate me that much?" she asked, peering into his face. He thought for a moment before answering. "Not as much as before," he said, "but I don't love you anymore. And no, don't hope that we can have some kind of new thing. I loved you for many years, worked for you, endured your antics, hoping that you would also begin to love me. And you couldn't even write a letter to me in 3 months. It's clear that you didn't care about anyone but yourself. Now the only thing you should care about is yourself. And yes, you should get checked for infections. Who knows what this entire contingent could reward you with." Sandy's face went white, but she nodded, admitting he was right. She turned and headed for the door, but before leaving, she stopped and turned to look at him one last time. "Sorry, Mike," she said. "I never meant to hurt you. And you know, you look great. Really, very good." Mike nodded slightly. "Thank you," he said, noting that she never said the words, "I love you." Sandy left the house, got into her car, and drove away. Mike took the signed papers to the notary's office, from where they were immediately handed over to the lawyer for filing with the court. He then went to buy himself new clothes, since everything he had no longer fit. After that, he stopped by a real estate agency to put the house up for sale. He decided not to look into the office where Sandy worked. Over the next 2 days, he cleared the house of her remaining belongings, dividing them into 3 piles, one to be burned, one to be dumped, and one to be donated to a charity shop. The burned pile included her wedding dress, their wedding album, and all the photos of them together. Mike didn't want anything left in his life that could remind him of her. He moved the bed from the main bedroom into the yard and hung a sign that said, "I'll give it away for free." An hour later, she was already taken away. That night, he placed the items from the burn pile into a fire pit in the backyard and watched as the flames reduced it all to ash. "Burn, burn, burn," he quietly repeated under his breath. Sandy temporarily moved in with her parents and later moved into a one-bedroom apartment with Greg, who was now divorcing Julia, and the process was extremely complicated. Mike received calls from Sandy's family members who were outraged that he had kicked her out into the street. Not realizing what she had done, they accused him of being cruel, so he sent everyone some selected photos and videos so that they would have an idea of her actions. He offered to send more if necessary. None of them bothered him anymore. Mike returned to work as a new man and took Greg's position as promised. Colleagues noted his changed appearance and confidence. 3 months ago, he had been a skinny, reserved man, but now he exuded confidence and masculinity, although he didn't let it get to his head. Several men from the office asked him about the transformation, but he just smiled mysteriously. Many women at work also noticed changes in him and tried to get closer, hoping for an affair. However, he kept his distance from them, not wanting to turn into a copy of Greg. The house sold in just a week, and Mike sent Sandy her share of the profits, albeit a small one. By then, he had already settled into a beautiful luxury condominium overlooking the river that flows through the center of the city. 2 months after returning from the camp, he received the final divorce document and went to celebrate his freedom at a local club with friends. That night, he enjoyed freedom with a charming blonde, meeting her at a club. He had experienced more passion in a few hours than he had experienced in the entire last year with Sandy. A few months later, he received a call from Sandy's parents. It turned out that she had been diagnosed with HIV, and she passed it on to Greg, who was now on the verge of poverty and could not hold down a job. Her mother said that when Greg found out about the disease, he flew into a rage and shot Sandy, killing her instantly. After that, realizing what he had done, he shot himself. Mike expressed his condolences and offered to pay for the funeral, but the parents refused, saying it would be a waste of money. As a result, Sandy and Greg were cremated at the expense of the municipality. Stupid rubbish, Mike thought as he hung up. Life went on, and Mike spent his time working out at the gym and occasionally going clubbing with friends. He wasn't looking for a new relationship, but fate brought him together with Janine, a recently divorced woman who had recently moved into his apartment complex. He immediately took a liking to her and asked her out on a date. It turned out that she was also interested in him, and soon they began dating, and a year later Mike proposed to her. To his delight, Janine agreed, and they were married a few weeks later. 2 months after their honeymoon in the Caribbean, Janine told him he was about to become a father. A few months later, Mike held his newborn son in his arms and vowed to himself that he would be the best father his son could ever ask for. He firmly decided that his boy would never become what he was. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.